Hi everyone, so today I wanted to talk about my guilty pleasures, and pretty much every channel that talks about reviewing media or commenting on media seems to be having, or at least in terms of music, seems to have a video discussing their guilty pleasures or talking about the concept or anything like that. And I wanted to quickly talk about a little bit about how I interpret the concept and what I'm referring to when I talk about a guilty pleasure. So I know that some people feel some kind of way about that term, and I want you to know that I'm not literally talking about feeling guilty for liking something, maybe a little bit of embarrassment at most. I'm talking about the kind of things that you know or you admit to yourself that maybe aren't that good, but you enjoy them a lot either way. If you do like something, there has to be some sort of quality that you see in it, sometimes catchiness, at least in terms of music, or maybe in a movie, it's maybe unintentionally funny or charming or something like that. So I'm not referring to things that you might not expect me to like, because I feel like there's a lot of music that maybe you wouldn't expect me to like, but I don't really think is bad music. I think it's actually very good in that it doesn't really need me to defend it or anything like that. I'm referring to things that I can't really say are masterpieces or anything, but that I enjoy them a lot anyway. And maybe they are kind of a little bit removed from what I tend to listen to. But yeah, so in terms of music, what I have here is the first one is a song by Sandra. It is an 80s pop song called Maria Magdalena. Which, if you might have heard of it, or you might have heard it or listened to it at some point, if you maybe were around in the 80s, I wasn't, certainly, or maybe you listen to 80s pop songs or something like that, I don't know. But to me, it's so strange because it sounds like such a generic 80s pop song, and it's kind of repetitive, and I don't really see a lot of qualities in it aside from the fact that it's a little bit catchy, as you might expect from a pop song, but I don't think it's even that necessarily. Like, sometimes I just can't help but I want to listen to it sometimes because it's so non-threatening. It's like just a pop song that does what one should do, and she sounds good in that song, at least in the studio version. Another one is I Hate Everything About You by 3 Days Grace. Their most known song, their most listened to song. I was reminded of this song when I was watching a video by the punk rock MBA, aka Finn McKenty, where he's talking about bad rock and sort of like bad rock music, or rock types of rock music or pop rock that are considered to be like tacky or lowbrow, or they're kind of associated with kind of low class people or what have you. They're kind of taken to as being bad taste, or being not as good as more highbrow and more elite kind of acts, I guess. But the song, I do have to say, it is a little bit lacking in subtlety and everything. At the same time, I do think there's something about the lack of subtlety that makes it also at the same time much more visceral and a little bit more direct, I guess. And it's like the kind of thing that I guess you would listen to mindlessly or what have you, or you just kind of are reminded of the chorus and you start to sing it, or listen to it in your head, and you have to listen to the actual song again. And honestly, I would say that the song instrumentally is a little bit better than it is lyrically, because it's obviously a really kind of, I'm not sure that I would say expected, but it's just a song about like being in a bad relationship and kind of like both parties being mutually bad to each other, and honestly nothing too fulfilling spiritually or anything, but it's a fun song, I guess. It's kind of interesting. I mean, it's kind of a dark theme, but it's also fun in terms of the sound, and it's, like I said, it's obviously very catchy, and it's not that simple and that easy to make a catchy song that is also not completely annoying and ridiculous. Well, I wouldn't know, I'm not a music composer or anything, but I assume that it wouldn't be that simple. Next one is Bichota by Karol G. a Colombian, what is she? I would say she's a reggaeton artist, I would say, or trap, I don't know, but this song is sort of like the anthem or like of the bad bitch in the Latin American sphere. I would say, in fact, that this song is one of the most popular, if not the most popular, of the last year, or at least I guess last year, in this country and probably in some other Latin American countries. It was huge, and it kind of does. What bothers me about the song is that it's one of those that kind of tricks you into listening to it over and over because of how short it is. And there is something to be said about the way Spotify works, in which it wants you to listen to shorter songs, or at least it makes it easy for newer artists, to just make short songs that you have to listen to over and over, or that make you want to listen to them over and over, as opposed to making longer songs that are a bit more developed or what have you. But at the same time, I mean, it's a fun song. It's about being like, it's sort of an aspirational song, if you will, except that it's not necessarily aspirational in the financial sense. It is to some degree, but it is also sort of aspirational in a sort of attitude sense. Like, I kind of trick myself into thinking that I'm some sort of like really confident person somehow when I listen to that song, and that, you know, I dress a certain way that I don't, and that I have the guts to like speak and dress a certain way that I obviously really don't. So the last one that I'll mention, I wasn't sure which one by Shakira to take as my guilty pleasure, because among Latin Americans it's generally understood that her best albums are her earliest, the ones before she was even blonde. Donde están los ladrones, and there's another one also before she was blonde, but I don't remember the name of the album. But yeah, those 2 or 3, and then as soon as she went blonde, that basically made her go mainstream and sell out, if you will, and she wasn't as genuine, at least in this sort of Latin American, you know, imaginary. And I do have to admit that her earlier albums, or at least Donde están los ladrones, is one of the best ones by her, if not her most interesting and more genuine and sort of refreshing album. But I can also see why she would move from that to a more, I guess, appealing to a more global audience sound, and, you know, transitioning from that to writing songs in both Spanish and English, so that she could appeal to as many people as possible. And of course, that's in great part the reason why she's as successful as she is now. So the pick that I went for in this video for, you know, my guilty pleasure is going to be Laundry Service. It's also one of the most fun ones, and kind of like one of the more appealing ones if you are sort of like, I guess, if you are kind of in a relationship, or you're breaking up or anything like that. This is one of those albums that just has like a couple of breakup songs and a couple of like falling in love songs, you know, like there's, you know, the kind of thing that pop albums would generally have. And I think Laundry Service is pretty good as an album as a whole, even though, you know, in contrast to her later albums, which are a bit more hit focused and more focused on having a couple of really catchy songs and just a lot of filler. And I think the Laundry Service still feels really genuine, and it doesn't seem to be trying to play it safe as some of her more recent material does. So some of my guilty pleasure movies are, I was kind of thinking a little bit too hard about this because I don't tend to rewatch movies very often, but I realized that one that I have rewatched a couple of times is The Parent Trap. Came out in 1998, and it has a 6.6 on IMDb. And it's a Disney Channel original movie, I think, or at least it's by Disney, I don't really remember, but it's a live action movie, in case you don't know, and it's the one with Lindsay Lohan where she's acting as a pair of twins. You know, she's both twins, of course. And, you know, it's a little bit kind of full of cliches. Some of the characters are kind of, like I said, you know, stereotypes basically. Looking back, some of them are kind of flat, and some of the aspects of the storyline are a little bit forced. But there's something about the pacing of this movie that just makes it so easy to rewatch. The scenes, not all of them are really that necessary, if you will, for the story, but they're all so fast and so short that it makes the movie just feel so much shorter than it really is, because it's actually 2 hours long, but it feels shorter, I would say. And it's just one of those movies that keeps a lot of conflict at all times, but it still is very lighthearted either way. So, it's just kind of something that's easy to watch, which is something that, just makes perfect material for a guilty pleasure type of movie. And I was also tempted to say Twilight, but the last time that I rewatched it, I didn't actually finish it. I mostly just like the kind of nostalgic charm of the beginning, like the first half at least of the movie is kind of like a little bit more nostalgic and charming and enjoyable. The second half, I almost like don't really have that very solid memories of. The rest of the movies don't even interest me that much. I don't think I've even watched any of them fully. I've seen like a couple of scenes from all of them, but I haven't really watched them fully. But yeah, there is something about the first movie that I think is really charming and nice, and also the soundtrack is one of those things that I think really helps the movie be much more watchable and rewatchable. So for series, there's two that I want to mention. Mostly reality, both of them are essentially reality TV. First one is Kitchen Nightmares, which not only have I seen pretty much all of the episodes, but I keep rewatching the scenes whenever they pop up on YouTube or anything like that. Just keep rewatching them, and it's so funny. Like, I know that it's the way that it's presented to you, it's like really biased, as you would expect for a reality TV show, but this type of really genuine dialogue where people are like making excuses and finding reasoning for bad behavior, or for just not caring about their businesses, it makes for really good trash TV, because you're just there sitting in your comfortable chair going, oh my god, I would never make these really obvious mistakes. But of course, you don't really know what you would do in those situations. But it makes for that kind of TV show where, it kind of helps you, the viewer, kind of feel superior, but it's not quite as horrible as I think for other shows that really exploit it to its absolute worst, like Dr. Phil and things like that. Those shows I don't even wanna like touch with a 10-foot pole, but something about Kitchen Nightmares is almost like lighthearted enough to be very enjoyable and really rewatchable, like I say, and almost like making memes out of it and references and sort of like all these phrases that are associated with the show. And the same thing happens with my second one that I wanted to mention is Teacup, which refers to Catch a Predator, the Dateline show. I'm pretty sure that when I first knew of this show, I was myself very, very young, probably a little kid, and I knew of their existence, but I never really got to watching them until more recently, like the last 2 or 3 weeks maybe. And I'm kind of surprised at how much I ended up enjoying it, because it's definitely not as lighthearted as something as Kitchen Nightmares. It's obviously about people potentially committing crimes, and a lot of them have committed that same felony or crime before. But in a way it is funny, because you see all these guys just like really scramble to find excuses for what they're doing, and some of them are so outlandish and ridiculous, the things that they come up with and the way that they behave, and the way that they're being cornered by Chris Hansen. It's just so enjoyable, because it's this very obvious thing that TV shows tend to do, reality TV tends to do, where there's this very obviously good presenting person or character. Like Chris Hansen is of course like the good guy or the voice of reason, and the predators are the bad guys, of course. Except that in this case, it's kind of indisputable that they're the bad people in the situation. In Kitchen Nightmares or what have you, that's a bit more, you kind of have to help things with some editing and stuff like that. But in Teacup, it's very evident, like the evidence is there. They have the chat logs. It's very obvious that they went there and try to have sex with a minor disguise, and it's kind of horrible, but at the same time, it's kind of, they're so ridiculous as people, and the community of Teacup just kind of like keeps making fun of them and making them into memes because of the things that they say and the way they behave, and the things that they try to excuse and justify themselves with, which are sometimes are pretty infuriating and sometimes are actually kind of ridiculous to the point of being funny, which is kind of what keeps me going back to that. So the last things that I'm going to mention are some anime, and I only have two to mention, but you might be surprised. I don't think I ever mentioned anime in this channel before. The first one that I'm going to mention is APH or Hetalia. The premise of this anime is already pretty questionable, although as always I'm not really like imposing limits to art and fiction, of course, but it's basically an anime about personified countries, and it's going to kind of like inherently rely on stereotypes about countries that are sometimes really obvious, and sometimes there are things that you didn't really necessarily know about, and you kind of do learn a little bit of, you know, fun facts here and there about countries and their history. But you know, for the most part, it's kind of just a silly show about characters just kind of like having minor conflict with each other. However, the main issue that people find with this show is actually the fandom, as is the case with a lot of things out there. Hetalia has a fandom that is particularly embarrassing and kind of cringe, and a lot of fandoms are known for being kind of cringe or kind of hostile, or you know, just not good, you know, embarrassing or whatever. I was never too deep into a fandom, but I was participating in the sense that, you know, I was looking for fanfics, looking for doujinshi and stuff like that. And also that's kind of part of the appeal of the show. The fact that all these characters who are mostly male, you know, representations of the countries, they're kind of presented to you in this really cutesy way, and they're given sort of like this chemistry between them that is almost, well, sometimes outright romantic or sexual between them, and sometimes it's a little bit implied, or you know, the tone is just kind of like that. And I swear it seems to be deliberate. Like, it's not just stuff the fans just saw out of nowhere and started to invent, you know, and write fanfics about and draw doujinshi, or you know, fan-made comics essentially about it. But again, the problem here is that since these characters are representing countries, then it's kind of a matter of time until they are just represented by stereotypes. You know, all countries are just kind of like, oh look, this country is obviously this way, and this country is this other way, and it removes some depth that this show could have potentially had. And the fandom also does, you know, tend to go with that same thing, to use stereotypes, to remove any potential depth, to, you know, oversimplify maybe historical processes, and sometimes trivialize or fetishize things like the Nazis, or you know, things like that. Which is something that I know that there's some other fandoms that have the same issue, that are similar in nature, like country balls and stuff like that. But Hetalia is known for being kind of like particularly cringy, because it's like, you know, it's adding that sort of really strange sexual layer, and I can't, you know, deny that that's part of the appeal, and that was also part of the appeal for me. The fact that all these characters were just so cute, and even Russia was shown as like a cute version of Russia. I mean, it's kind of funny, like, how can you make Russia look cute, you know? But not just anyone can do that, I'm just saying. And like I mentioned, I don't really engage with the fandom very often, so I wouldn't really know what other issues they have, but I'm just talking about what I know about. So the last one that I want to mention is one that I think is sort of like the least guilty of all the pleasures. I do see issues and sort of flaws about it, and you know, it's not, you kind of have to, when you say that you like this show or these shows, you kind of have to say with some degree of like self-awareness, and that is Yu-Gi-Oh, and specifically Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, which for some reason I latched onto more than the original one, and that is saying a lot. So in the 5Ds series, I think the first and second seasons are actually really great, just in terms of the writing, the storytelling, the characters, the pacing. I think it's great. The rest of it is kind of like typical anime problems, a lot of filler, some characters lack development, or you know, they lack development that they had before. Their character arcs are sort of interrupted and stopped, and then they add more characters that I just never found quite as likable as the first ones. Admittedly, I also had a little bit of a crush on Yusei Fudo, but you know, that's kind of neither here nor there. To this day, I still really like the sort of like all the intro songs and the outro songs, you know, the credits, the end credits songs on the original Japanese version. which is the version that I watched. You know, the subs in, you know, anime terms, the subs. As and it's also the case for the first show, because I knew of its existence when I was a little kid and that came out, but I never actually watched the full show, the first one, Duel Monsters, until I was like 13 or 14, at which point I kind of got really attached to it, and I, you know, read fanfics and, you know, the typical stuff like that. And it was kind of like the main thing that I was like really into in that period of my life, you know, when I was like from 14 to like 15 or 13 to 14 or something like that. And, you know, in those years it's obviously become much cooler to watch anime and, you know, sort of like, you know, things like that. But I remember even just like 4 or 5 years ago, it was kind of it was a little bit more you kind of, you know, I wouldn't say it was embarrassing, but you kind of had to be a bit more self-aware, you know. You couldn't just shout it out like that. The fact that, you know, you kept watching a children's TV show essentially when you were already a teenager, and you were supposed to be watching more mature stuff, which I did watch, of course, you know, just regular stuff for teens or for adults, but it was one of the main things that I still watched and really loved. But yeah, I hope you found this video interesting or funny or entertaining, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.